Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Why this movie exists. So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2. Joining me today is Rasco, Rasco's Modern Life, and we are continuing Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that Geeky Gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by a biased educational system, except not at all. Rasco picked our movie review for today, so Rasco, what are we reviewing?
The masterpiece Pearl Harbor.
Masterpiece.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I think I know, but what made you want to talk about Pearl Harbor?
Ben Affleck's in it. Justice League came out, and I felt like this was a great movie to choose if you want to go really counter to the spirit of picking historical movies. And so this is where we landed.
Fair enough. I don't know. You start us off then. Where's a good place to begin with Pearl Harbor?
Okay, so this is an interesting movie for Michael Bay because it's in a different time in Michael Bay's career where he wasn't quite the Michael Bay that we know and love today. This was Michael Bay back when he hadn't really decided that he was just going to be like a big explosion guy. But like it's there. All of it's there, but he hasn't like decided that he's going to do that yet, that he's going to like shill out for that. He thinks he's James Cameron in this movie. Mm-hmm. He thinks that he's the big technical master who's going to... this is his Titanic.
Oh, definitely. This is trying to cash in on Titanic's plunge. I don't know. I wanted to make some kind of insensitive boat-related pun.
Plunge.
No, I mean, he really is trying to, like, the studios kind of greenlit this because they were trying to do that. Like, we got the love triangle here. It's all trying to cash in on that. And, you know, in all honesty, this isn't a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. I feel like this is not as bad a movie as people try to call it out for, but maybe that's just me.
I think I kind of agree with you. This is a very easy movie to make fun of. It's not a very good movie. And based on where Michael Bay's career goes after this movie, it's very easy to look back at this movie and see all of the things that are Michael Bayisms that will later be much bigger problems with his movies. They all are here. He just hasn't like decided that that's his thing. Like, It's interesting. It's like when you watch like a Shane Black movie, there's all these little Shane Black-isms, like oftentimes it's set around Christmas, stuff like that. And it's like very intentional. Like those are like things Shane Black likes about his own stuff. And they're not obvious in his first movies, but once they keep reoccurring, you're like, oh, he likes to insert these things in his movies, and they're kind of like his own little things. They're his own little Easter eggs for himself and people that like his movies. Well, Michael Bay kind of evolves to do that, but all of it's still present in this movie to some degree. And I think that's just really interesting. Because
it's got
not
all the dynamic moving shots and like,
yeah,
you know, you got to give Michael Bay credit. It is really cool framing. It's excessive as hell, but it is really cool framing and camera movements.
Yeah, I've seen people talk about this movie where they say that like one of the things that is really impressive about it that Michael Bay really gets is that he does know how to put the camera in a place where it really just, it doesn't exaggerate, but it really displays like the scale of everything. Like everything really feels real and big, and it's all like there. And that's the part about Michael Bay that I think you have to like understand is actually legitimately impressive. That he can, to some degree, keep track of all of these moving parts and like put it together. And then at the same time, you have to really have some foresight when you're like on set filming a lot of these kind of like big action like set pieces and crap like this. It's really impressive. So, you know, you have to throw that out there. At the same time, that's kind of true of most of his movies. So
no,
it's not
definitely. Like he's got his bag of tricks. He knows what he is doing with the camera. He knows how to use CGI. He knows how to make things look cool. It's just it gets too excessive and it loses its charm real fast. Like we did, this is a weird one to compare it to, but we did like the Moana review, right? And in that I talked about how Lin-Manuel Miranda, between like watching Moana and watching Hamilton, since he was involved in both of those things, one more so than the other, he clearly has a bag of tricks that he likes to go to. Like he really is a fan of recurring lines, recurring themes, recurring music in his stuff. And that's a fine bag of tricks to go through, but once you notice it, you start to notice it big time. It's like Tarantino with the foot shots. Every Tarantino movie has a shot of some women's feet. It's ridiculous. And it's like prolonged shots of women's feet. But I think the key difference with Bay is his framing, his camera work is the only thing about his movies that is any good. And so once you pick up on it, it loses its charm really fast, and it immediately makes you stop caring about that side of it, and so you start to focus on other stuff, and all the other stuff sucks.
Yes.
So to rope this all back to Pearl Harbor, yeah, like the scene of Pearl Harbor getting attacked, it is visually dynamic. It is, impressive use of CGI for the early 2000s. And it just, it looks really, it's really well shot. It looks good on the screen. But there's just so much happening in that scene in particular that is just pretty blatantly insulting to just multiple people. I think the most disgusting thing that happens, particularly in the attack, is you see the Japanese Zeros attack a hospital, and they didn't do that. And it's a big deal to show attacking civilians attacking a hospital like that, because that's a war crime. A surprise attack in this nature is considered a criminal action of war, but it's not the same thing as a war crime, if that makes sense. So, I don't know. There's a difference between just everybody kind of registers that there's a difference between attacking a military target, unannounced or not, and attacking civilians. There's huge difference between those two things. And so just see something like that it's a little like, wow, that's really fucked up to just throw in there like that. And then there's like the Navy guy who's like holding on, yelling like, I can't swim. And I'm like, really? I'm pretty sure the U.S. Navy required its seamen to be able to swim. What's the proper term there? Is it soldier? Doesn't apply, does it? Because they're Navy.
Yeah, they might be seamen. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I need to brush up on military terminology. So I don't know. Just like I'm not sure what that moment's supposed to imply. Is it supposed to be? Because to me, it just comes off as laughable. But I don't feel like he wants me to laugh at this guy for not knowing how to swim, but being in the Navy. And I'm sure you could maybe find one guy who was in the Navy at that period and didn't know how to swim. But I think it's weird to highlight something like that in
it's
in
kind of
your
weird.
film.
Yeah, there's another weird moment like that where like the bomb falls and the guy's like, "It's okay, it was a dud," and then he explodes.
Yeah,
it was not a dud.
That's a comedic beat, right?
Yeah,
And I don't want to laugh at someone who's about to die when they're supposed to be one of our heroes, or it's supposed to be a tragedy that they're dying.
yeah, especially because it's like a real event that this is based on, where it's like in that you approach a big a lot of times in war movies, you're supposed to feel more like fear and suspense versus like the thrill of action when you're watching a lot of like the battle scenes. And this movie doesn't do that. It kind of treats all of the dog fights, all of the explosions, all that stuff. It really kind of treats it like an action movie. And that's interesting because that's why I feel like little comedic things like that are there. Because I feel like they're like, oh yeah, in Transformers, we can stop the action to have a joke. In whatever movie, we can stop the action to have a joke. But oftentimes those movies are completely fictional. And this movie is not. So it's just kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to be fair, there's some stuff that like I'm sure people would find insulting, but I actually kind of liked. Like there's a scene where it's during the attack, and the attack is like really, really long, so it feels like a good chunk of this damn movie. There's a scene during the attack where like three Navy soldiers, whatever, are like kind of huddling and are scared, but they're like on the top of the ship. They're right there. They can go fight and join the action, but they're just kind of like huddling under part of the ship and hiding. And like a commander comes by and yells at them and like grabs them and throws them out and tells them to go fight. And I'm sure some people would probably find that insulting to like show troops doing that, but I don't know, that seems really realistic to me.
I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah, because like there are people that freeze when the action, like when that kind of thing happens. Like that's just people on the battlefield freeze sometimes because, particularly with a surprise attack like that, they're just not ready for it in any way, shape, or form. Do you feel like maybe people are kind of harder on some of the tonal weirdness of this because it turns out to be Michael Bay and Michael Bay turns into who he is, compared to someone like where they're more forgiving with Spielberg? Because I can think of the scene at the beginning of Saving Private Ryan where they're on the beach in Normandy, and like the one soldier gets shot in the head, but the bullet doesn't go through his helmet.
Mm-hmm.
And they all kind of look at him and they go, "Wow, you're one lucky son of a bitch." And then he gets shot in the head again and he dies.
Yeah.
And like that's that same kind of tonal weirdness, but for some reason with Bay, people kind of harp on it, us included, whereas with Spielberg, it kind of goes under the radar.
I think that the difference between, and let's just use the Saving Private Ryan thing as an example. I think the difference there is that in that movie, that scene is legitimately frightening, and that's kind of like one of those things where it's like you're in war, and then something that's kind of like a shining little moment of humor happens, and you as an audience member are like softened up for a second. You're like, "Oh wow, that's so cool that the bullet didn't go through," and then he gets shot in the head, and you're like, "Oh my god!" And it's like, it's kind of like slapping you in the face, like, this is war. Like, there's no daisies. It's just all shit. It's all horrible. Mm-hmm. It's scary. I think it plays a little bit differently because of that. Mm-hmm. But, I'm sure there are maybe examples where people are being a little bit too unfair to Michael Bay in certain regards. It's just, I don't know. It's just that it's a consistent problem with Michael Bay in a lot of his movies.
I would agree. I think he does crap like this a lot, and so it's just kind of gets highlighted and brought to the forefront here. There's also other stuff where it's like Michael Shannon and Ben Affleck. This is them in the early 2000s. I can see the frosting in their goddamn hair. Can't you? Can you see like the highlights every so often?
When Ben Affleck gets out of the plane at the very ending and like he pulls the coffin out, like, like the coffin's like coming out behind him.
Uh-huh.
he gets out of that plane. The sun is in his hair. It's yes, right there. It's very noticeable.
Yeah, I'm like, God, that is. It just looks cheap. Michael Shannon too. It's kind of weird to see Zod like that, but it's whatever. He
Michael Shannon's good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. And there's like humorous moments that I like here and there, like when they show up at the base and they go, "You guys pilots," and Michael Shannon just goes, "We're trying. There's a lot of levers and knobs, though." I'm like, that's really funny. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I feel like okay, so I feel like this movie is way too long.
Oh, definitely.
It's way too long, and I think a big problem with this movie is that it really feels like, in order to achieve that same kind of like Titanic feel of a really specific like story about two characters and their romance, and then it happens to be within the greater context of this historical event, I feel like this tries to do that, but it doesn't. It comes across very much like they wanted to make a Pearl Harbor movie. They had a completely unrelated movie about two pilots in a love triangle and that whole thing, and they just kind of put the two movies together, and they made the entire love triangle pilot movie, and then just filmed a big segment of Pearl Harbor and like put it in the movie.
Yeah, that's the love story is easily the worst part about this, because it just takes up so much of this goddamn movie, and it adds nothing to like making you feel for these people, right? Like,
yeah, it really doesn't.
Like, I mean, I would have rather followed Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character throughout the whole movie. Like,
yeah, I agree. It was much more interesting.
Like that, he should have, like, you could have had the first act be about him, signing up for the Navy, wanting to see the world, then getting kind of disillusioned with the way that, black people were treated in the Army at the time, and then still have the, inspiration, the want, the drive to fight for his country, even though they've wronged him. When push comes to shove, like, he saves the day, kind of, or like helps save lives during the battle and all that stuff. But he's like, it's weird because I can almost imagine his movie all beginning to end, but he is like such a footnote character, and then like he doesn't even really get a proper ending, which is weird.
Very weird. Very weird.
He's introduced, very briefly, and it looks like he might be like a third protagonist, but God knows this movie already has enough of them. And then he just like after the attack, he's just not involved anymore. I'm like, oh, that was unexpected.
Yeah. The editing and pacing in this movie is weird at a lot of points. Mm-hmm. The first act specifically. So I was laughing hysterically, not really with the movie, kind of at the movie. It was legitimately amusing me, but I was kind of laughing at the movie during the whole section where it's cutting back and forth between like the girl telling the story about how she and Ben Affleck met, and it's like going back and showing you it, and then like Ben Affleck like falls and like smashes his nose on this table, and I'm just like, what is going on? And it's so weirdly edited. We're like, why did we choose to tell this part of the story this way? And like, it's just really weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
really weird.
You just don't get invested in it. Like, I don't know, man. I felt enough investment between the friendship, and I feel like throwing the woman in here to like, kind of break that up is really weird. I think all of Ben Affleck's stuff with the Eagle Squadron is just... It's just the worst. It's so bad. Just like, okay. So it's already pretty trite and cliche to do the whole writing letters to the girl back home thing. But
yeah,
fuck it, whatever. It's hardly the first thing to deal with that. The idea that an American soldier is assigned to Eagle Squadron is just such a fucking... Like, it just reads of... It reeks of, like, they only read the first sentence about something about Eagle Squadron. It's like, Eagle Squadron, a unit in Britain that was filled with Americans and people from other countries fighting the Germans before America entered the war. Oh, perfect. It doesn't read the fact that, like, due to treaties, American enlisted men were not allowed to be part of Eagle Squadron. It just throws that right the fuck out. It's like, no, that they couldn't do that. That would be, you know, like, illegal and stuff. And they wouldn't be allowed to, if they were in the army, they wouldn't be allowed to be fighting an Eagle Squadron. You had to be a civilian volunteer. But, like, Ben Affleck shows up in his fucking, you know, uniform. It's like, what? It creates an inaccuracy that doesn't need to be there because it only serves to further this, like, cliche-ass love story, love triangle bullshit. And then the like, dog fights with that scene aren't even very good anyway.
Yeah, and no, you're right. It's weird. And it feels like another movie, too. Doesn't that feel like a movie? Why is there so much not Pearl Harbor stuff before and after all of the Pearl Harbor stuff? That's why it feels like a different script. It's
ridiculous, isn't it? It's like you could maybe convince me the Doolittle raids being like this, you know, big cathartic moment for the U.S. will return and it will win the war, all that stuff. You could convince me that has a place in a Pearl Harbor movie. You could not convince me that we need all this love triangle stuff. We don't need Eagle Squadron in the Pearl Harbor movie.
Yeah, we don't need that. You're right.
I mean, it feels really contrived for Ben Affleck to be at Pearl Harbor after he got back from, you know, the Western Front. That's, like, so out of place to me because, like...
Yeah.
So he volunteered to go fight with the Eagle Squadron. He got shot down but was rescued by a French fishing boat. And he had to escape occupied France in the height of the war. I don't know how the fuck you managed that one, but good job, Ben Affleck. So, like, if he had to escape occupied France, there's nowhere for him to go but Britain. So once he gets to Britain, he just goes back home? Why wouldn't he keep fighting with Eagle Squadron?
Yeah, it's really weird. I think the biggest problem with the ending of this movie is that Ben Affleck's character, like, okay, they decide to go the love triangle route when he gets back, and then there's no way for them to, like, resolve it, so they just have somebody die. Like, I hate love triangles that are fixed by the person making it awkward just dying.
There's that, and then there's just other weird stuff with once he's back. Like, okay, so they fight in the bar, and then the MPs show up because of their fight. And I'm like, okay, I can on some level believe that they would decide to run away together as opposed to getting thrown in the brig. But then, like, they both sleep in the same car that night.
Yeah.
And the next morning they wake up and that's when all the Pearl Harbor shit happened. But, like, what? Why would they do that? Why would they be together the next morning? I cannot wrap my head around that one. Wouldn't it have made more sense for them to, like, end up in the brig and then, I don't know, for, like, a bomb or something to break them out and then for them to go hop in planes? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's like, you were pushing enough for me to think that they would, you know, leave together, but on some level I was willing to accept that. Just, you know, like, I've been pissed at someone before, and I wouldn't sleep next to them for the night like that, you know? It's just, it's weird. If I was that pissed off at someone that we just got into a fist fight, I don't think I'd be cool enough to just, like, even if we're in the same room, or the same, you know, house, I wouldn't want to sleep in the same room or something like that. I don't know. It's weird. Unbelievable.
It's also weird because they do a terrible job of really establishing their friendship. So, like, we see in the beginning of the movie them as kids. And then all of a sudden now, like, we're adults, they're pilots, yada, yada, yada. But what's weird is that we literally get, like, you think almost like, oh, they're going to be, like, a dual protagonist type of story. Like, it's going to be about these two friends. And very quickly, it feels like, oh, they're pushing this one guy off to the side so we can just have all this Ben Affleck stuff. But then Ben Affleck's out of the picture, and then it switches, and you aren't prepared for it to switch, and they didn't have enough of them just being friends for you to really understand the friendship before they just use their friendship for easy drama. That's what's so useless about all of this excess stuff in the beginning of the movie, is it really just doesn't work. And it's there specifically to satiate those kind of like, we didn't have enough time to develop the characters critiques that movies like this might get. Well, it does so much of character building that means nothing that it's like huge misstep.
And I think it's because Bay doesn't understand characters, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was a kid in middle school, like, I wanted to be a writer, but I thought writing was just plotting, and then you just kind of, like, make up a bunch of stuff to happen in between the A, B, and C of your plot. And, like, none of that stuff that happens really matters. So I'd write stories and just like, okay, and, you know, these people are hanging out and drama, and, like, argument here. And they'd have arguments about things that, like, did not matter to this like, structural story at all. It was completely useless. And I feel like Bay never learned the lesson of when something is useless.
Yeah.
Okay. Guess we'll talk a little bit about the quote-unquote accuracies and inaccuracies of this movie. So I talked about Eagle Squadron. The Doolittle raid, like, I was really curious, so I had to look it up, and it turns out they exaggerated in the movie, but not to an extent that bothers me, but, like, they did legit have broomsticks in their planes in place of guns for psychological warfare, I guess. That is one of the things, like, World War II is so batty like that. There's so many goddamn stupid ideas that are just like, oh, fuck it, let's try anything. So that kind of, I was surprised, but I wasn't too surprised knowing what I know about World War II. So, I mean, they exaggerate the timing of it in the movie, but I don't really care about that. They exaggerate how effective the Doolittle raid was, and I don't care for that. Like, you know, the whole point of it was just to show that they could bomb Tokyo, even though the Navy's, you know, the main fleet of the Pacific was just destroyed. That was mainly the idea. It's just like, we want to show you that we can hit you back. And then this, like, shows us they completely demolish a weapons factory and all this stuff. That's just not what happened. And I don't know. I feel like it kind of undercuts the point of it when you show it being that damn effective. Because it just makes it feel like, okay, well, the war is going to be over in, like, a week. How'd you feel about the portrayal of the Japanese in this?
I don't know. While watching the movie, it feels, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but every time we cut to the Japanese, it feels kind of like we're cutting to the Empire in Star Wars. Like, all of a sudden, it just feels ominous and, like, dark and dangerous.
I mean,
and
I don't really have a problem with that necessarily.
And yeah, that's the thing. Like, I'm wondering, like, do I really have a problem with that, or is that just an observation? Because I don't know how, like, that seems like the proper way to, like, speak the language of cinema, right? Like, regardless, like, they're the antagonists. I mean, it's funny to talk, story.
Like, it's funny that you go to Star Wars, because Star Wars is based off fascist imagery, and Japan was an imperial fascist state at that point. So I really don't have a problem with evoking that kind of tone. One thing I guess I was impressed by, and I don't know if if the Admiral is supposed to be the same guy, and you'll have to forgive me for forgetting his name. But the Japanese admiral that planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, the whole point of it was he kind of did the calculus and knew that if Japan was going to have any hope of winning a war with America, they would have to do it within like 6 months to a year of starting a war. Because you talk about the ideas of a production economy. Like, if you ever play the game Civ and you go to war, it doesn't really matter. Like, a lot of things stop mattering, like location and distance and all these things. They can make a difference, but they stop mattering as much as just raw ability to produce troops and weaponry. Mm-hmm. And America is a production economy. It's just, it's very effective at, you know, mobilizing factories and workers and getting stuff made, particularly in the war. Japan, it's a fucking island nation. They don't have a ton of resources. So the admiral that planned the attack was like, yeah, if we can't take out their Pacific Fleet and then launch a reasonable invasion of the mainland, we don't have a ton of hope of actually winning a war with the United States. And so he convinces his superiors to launch an attack on Pearl Harbor that kind of demolishes the fleet. But then he has no luck convincing them to press the attack and go for an invasion for whatever reason. I guess they didn't want to split their troops up too much between the U.S. and China, which just makes me wonder, well, then why the fuck did you get the U.S. in the war? That was pretty stupid. Hitler, of course, being an idiot too, decides to declare war on the United States after the United States declares war on Japan. God, that man made a ton of mistakes, thank God. So, you know, there's just like, I felt that the movie did a pretty good job of displaying like that mentality of, it's not really a good idea to be doing this, but here's the best strategy we've got, and let's see, you know, what happens. And so, you know, you got the Japanese admiral that's like, you know, I fear we have woken a sleeping giant. And that's not an actual quote, but that is kind of right to the way that the particular Japanese admiral felt about what, you know, declaring war on the United States would do to the empire. So I thought that was pretty clever. I thought that was well handled. You know, you hear Michael Bay, Pearl Harbor movie, you just kind of, part of you expects to see a bunch of, you know, rat-faced Japs that are half drunk while they pull off the raid or some shit, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm, you know, reasonably shocked that Michael Bay didn't portray the Japanese in a just downright insulting fashion. Mm-hmm. Besides, you know, showing them shoot up a hospital. So yeah, I'm kind of, overall, I guess I'm positive on the portrayal of the Japanese here. Yeah. You got anything else with this one, or you want to go on to ratings?
I'll say this is definitely not Michael Bay's worst movie.
Yeah.
Not even close.
The bar isn't very low, though.
Yeah, it's not very low, but definitely not his worst movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I'll go first on ratings. I'll give this a 2.5 out of 5 crop dusters.
And I will give this 2 out of 5 duds.
Okay. Oh, what should we talk about next week? Let's talk about Troy.
Ooh.
Wait, I'm getting that right? Is there a Thursday? Yeah, there's one more Thursday in the month. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about Troy.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, the 2004 movie with Brad Pitt. Okay, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the Beta Male Cuck.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.